In the vast expanse of the Orion Arm, where interstellar civilizations flourish like mold on expired nutrition cubes, there exists a cardinal rule that every spacefaring species learns early: avoid humans at all costs. I, Commander Vrix of the Zelturian Reconnaissance Fleet, am about to explain why this rule exists, and why I personally had the misfortune of helping establish it. Allow me to clarify something about the galactic community. We're not particularly brave. We've evolved over millennia to avoid confrontation whenever possible. Our weapons are primarily defensive, our ships prioritize escape velocity over attack capability, and our diplomatic protocols involve an excessive amount of bowing and apologizing. It's worked wonderfully for us. The Galactic Confederation has enjoyed peace for 12 generations, with only the occasional territorial dispute over uninhabited gas giants, or arguments about which species makes the best fermented beverages. Then we discovered Earth. Commander, sensors are picking up an unidentified vessel approaching our research outpost on Proxima Centauri IV, my first officer Quib reported, his eye stalks quivering with what I recognized as mild concern. Classification, I asked, setting down my cup of steaming flort juice. Unknown, sir, but the energy signature suggests a combustion-based propulsion system, highly inefficient. Possibly primitive. Primitive. My skin rippled with intrigue, shifting from its standard bureaucratic beige to a curious teal. Fascinating. Put it on the viewer. The holographic display flickered to life, revealing the most absurd spacecraft I'd ever witnessed. It looked like someone had welded several metal canisters together, strapped on a few solar panels as an afterthought, and painted unnecessary stripes along the hull. The vessel wobbled slightly as it approached, as if the pilot was still figuring out the controls. Are they sending any communication? I asked. Lieutenant Draz, my communications officer, fluttered her respiratory membranes in the Zelturian equivalent of a shrug. Just this repeating audio message, Commander. She activated the transmission, and a cheerful, completely unfamiliar voice filled our command center. Howdy, aliens. This is Captain Doug Jackson of the Earth vessel Second Chance. We come in peace and brought snacks. Permission to dock and share cultural exchange, as well as Doritos. The command center fell silent. 12 pairs of eye stalks turned toward me. Did it just say, howdy? I asked. And something about Doritos, added Quib, struggling with the unfamiliar word. I straightened my ceremonial sash, and made what would later be recognized as the first of many catastrophic decisions regarding humans. Allow them to dock, prepare the formal greeting chamber, and someone check the xenobiological database for any information on these humans. Little did I know that this simple command would lead to the most embarrassing incident in Confederation history, an interstellar diplomatic crisis, and my eventual demotion to narrator of cautionary tales for juvenile Zelturians. But hindsight, as humans say, is 20/20, a reference to their primitive visual acuity measurement that makes absolutely no sense to our 17-point vision scale. As the strange vessel docked with our research outpost, our xenobiologist Mip frantically searched the database. Commander, I have minimal information, Mip reported, her scales paling to an anxious lavender. Humans are from Sol 3, oxygen breathers, carbon-based. They're classified as, oh dear, what is it? I demanded. They're classified as unpredictably hardy, with inexplicable survival tendencies and dangerous levels of curiosity. There's a warning attached. Approach with extreme caution. Do not threaten. Avoid if possible. I dismissed this with a wave of my upper appendage. They said they brought snacks. Mip, how dangerous could they be? As Captain Doug Jackson stepped through the airlock and into our greeting chamber, I got my first look at a human. He stood upright on two thick limbs, had only 2 eyes, and displayed his teeth constantly in what we would later learn was called a smile, rather than a threat display. He wore a blue covering with patches, and carried a container labeled Cool Ranch. Greetings, Earth Vessel Captain, I said formally. I am Commander Vrix of the Zelturian Reconnaissance Fleet, representing the Galactic Confederation. Awesome, Doug exclaimed, his volume causing several of my officers to recoil. First contact. This is even cooler than I imagined. And trust me, I've imagined this a lot, like since I was 8. Hey, are those tentacles or really long fingers? I stared at him, momentarily unable to process the breach of diplomatic protocol. No formal acknowledgement of titles, no recitation of ancestral achievements, just questions about appendages. We have monitored your approach with interest, I continued, desperately trying to adhere to proper first contact procedures. The Galactic Confederation welcomes peaceful interaction with new species, provided they respect our customs and, is that a coffee machine? Doug interrupted, pointing at our sacred water purification shrine. Man, some things really are universal. Hey, anyone want a Dorito? They're ranch-flavored, which doesn't actually taste like a ranch, more like buttermilk and garlic powder, but they're pretty awesome. He thrust the container toward Lieutenant Draz, who emitted our species' panic pheromone, triggering the station's automated defense protocol. And that's how, within 3 minutes of our first human encounter, our security drones deployed and shot Captain Doug Jackson directly in the chest, with a stun pulse designed to incapacitate a being 3 times his size. What happened next would change galactic politics forever. The human looked down at the smoking hole in his blue uniform, patted it with his 5-fingered hand, and did the last thing any of us expected. He laughed. The sound of human laughter, I would later learn, has been compared by various species to everything from mating calls of Ventusian sky serpents, to a waste disposal unit processing crystalline materials. To our Zelturian auditory perception, it was simply chaotic and distressing. Yet there stood Captain Doug Jackson, with a thumb-sized hole burned through his uniform, and what must have been at least minor dermal damage, laughing as if we'd just performed an amusing cultural ritual rather than attempted to neutralize a potential threat. "Whoa, you guys don't mess around with the welcome party," Doug exclaimed, brushing charred fabric from his chest. "Good thing I was wearing my lucky undershirt." He pulled aside the damaged material, to reveal another layer beneath. Kevlar titanium weave. Standard issue for exploration missions after the Ganymede incident. You know how it is with unknown environments, better safe than sorry. I stared in horror at the human's continued animation. Our security protocols had failed. The being was still functional, still talking, still holding out that strange container of Doritos. Security breach. "The subject is resistant to standard containment measures," shrieked Lieutenant Draz, her voice modulating to our emergency frequency. "Deploy secondary countermeasures," ordered Quib, who had taken shelter behind our ceremonial greeting podium. The security drones responded immediately, deploying a more concentrated stun pulse, this one designed for large aquatic predators. The beam struck the human directly in the torso again. Doug staggered back 2 steps, then straightened, patting his smoking chest. "Okay, that one tickled a bit. Look, is this some kind of alien handshake I don't know about? Because where I come from, we usually just, it's still operational," Mip wailed, retreating toward the emergency evacuation tubes. The database warning was correct. Maximum containment protocol. I found myself shouting, all diplomatic training abandoned in the face of this apparently invulnerable alien. The security system responded with our final defensive option, a localized gravity pulse that would effectively immobilize any known species by increasing their body weight tenfold. The generators hummed, the lights dimmed momentarily, and Captain Doug Jackson stumbled slightly and grabbed a nearby console for support. "Whoa, head rush. Is the artificial gravity acting up? 1 second I feel like I'm back in Earth's gravity, the next it's like basic training all over again." He shook his head and took another step toward us. "Anyway, as I was saying about these Doritos, that was the breaking point." Panic erupted throughout the greeting chamber. Officer Plynn slithered rapidly toward the escape pods, leaving behind a trail of stress mucus. 2 junior technicians attempted to merge their forms into a defensive cluster, a primordial response our species hadn't displayed in millennia. Quib activated his emergency personal shield, which enveloped him in an impenetrable but highly conspicuous bubble of pulsating energy. "Fall back. The human is advancing," someone shouted as Doug took another casual step forward, still holding out his offering. I'd like to say I maintained my commander's composure. I'd like to claim I stood firm as the representative of the Zelturian fleet. The security recordings, however, would later show me climbing halfway up the ceremonial tapestry that adorned our greeting chamber wall, my scales flashing the deep crimson of absolute terror. "Quarantine the station. Alert the Confederation Council. We have encountered a Category 1 biological anomaly," I ordered, my voice several octaves higher than regulation standard. "Guys, is everything okay?" Doug asked, appearing genuinely concerned as chaos unfolded around him. "Is it something I said, or is this just how your species says hello? Because I'm trying to be culturally sensitive here." His continued approach, now with a concerned expression that somehow displayed even more teeth, triggered our final automated response, the station lockdown. Blast doors slammed shut, separating the greeting chamber from the rest of the facility. "Evacuate all non-essential personnel," I commanded from my undignified position on the wall tapestry. "Prepare for possible station abandonment." Doug stood in the center of the greeting chamber, looking around in bewilderment, as warning lights flashed and alarm tones sounded. The container of Doritos was still extended hopefully in one hand. Is this about the Doritos? Because if you guys are gluten-free or something, I brought other snacks. I've got Twinkies, beef jerky, and some freeze-dried ice cream in my ship. The human is attempting psychological warfare with unknown terminology. MIP shouted from inside an emergency containment tube. It's listing potential bioweapons. What happened next would be analyzed in Confederation tactical academies for decades. Captain Doug Jackson, apparently deciding that our reaction constituted some form of rejection, shrugged his shoulders, opened the container, and began consuming the contents himself. The crunching sound as he bit into the triangular objects was the final straw. The human is consuming solid matter during a first contact scenario. This violates all known diplomatic protocols. Quib's voice was barely recognizable through his personal shield. It's absorbing unknown substances to enhance its already formidable resilience, added Draz. Commander, we must retreat immediately. I made the only decision possible under the circumstances. With as much dignity as I could muster while clinging to a ceremonial tapestry, I gave the order that would forever change our standing in the Galactic Confederation. Abandon station. I repeat, abandon station. All personnel to emergency evacuation vessels immediately. As klaxons blared and my crew scrambled toward the escape pods, I caught one last glimpse of Captain Doug Jackson. He stood alone in our greeting chamber, surrounded by flashing warning lights, a bewildered expression on his face and orange dust on his fingers. Was it something I said? The invulnerable human called after us. I just wanted to say hi from Earth. The last thing I heard before sealing myself into my commander's escape pod was Doug's voice over the station's communication system. Hello, alien friends? You left your coffee machine on. As our evacuation fleet jumped to safety coordinates, I transmitted an emergency signal to Confederation headquarters, with what would become the most infamous first contact report in our history. Encountered human. Weapons ineffective. Subject displays immunity to standard containment. Recommend immediate quarantine of sector, and revision of first contact protocols. They are exactly as dangerous as the database warned. I didn't know it then, but this was just the beginning of our problems with Captain Doug Jackson, the human who just wouldn't go down. The Grand Council chamber of the Galactic Confederation wasn't designed for emergency sessions. Located in the geometrically perfect center of our space station, itself orbiting a carefully selected neutron star that our astronomers assured us would remain stable for at least another 7 million years, the chamber featured uncomfortable seating arrangements, meant to keep discussions brief and focused. Today, however, comfort was the least of our concerns. This emergency session of the Confederation High Council will now commence, announced High Chancellor Zorn, her crystalline exoskeleton glinting under the chamber's bioluminescent lighting. Commander Vrix of the Zelturian Reconnaissance Fleet will present his report on the human incident. All 17 representatives of the Confederation's founding species turned their various sensory organs in my direction. I stood on the presenter's platform, trying to project confidence, despite the fact that my scales still hadn't returned to their normal coloration since the encounter with the human. Esteemed council members, I began, approximately 42 standard cycles ago, my research outpost encountered a vessel of previously unclassified design. This vessel contained a single occupant, who identified himself as Captain Doug Jackson of the planet Earth. Earth? Interrupted Counselor Grek, a methane-breathing entity, who communicated through controlled gas emissions that our translator rendered in a surprisingly melodious soprano. That miserable rock in the Sol system? We've been monitoring them for centuries. They're barely out of their stone age. With respect, Counselor, I continued, they appear to have advanced considerably. The human arrived in a spacecraft that, while crude by our standards, successfully navigated to our outpost in the Proxima Centauri system. Get to the relevant details, Commander, Chancellor Zorn prompted, her mandibles clicking impatiently. Why exactly did you abandon a fully operational research facility? I took what our species considers a deep breath, absorbing oxygen through all 7 respiratory membranes simultaneously. The human proved resistant to our standard containment measures. When our security systems engaged due to a misunderstanding, the subject was struck with a level 3 stun pulse. It showed no effect. Murmurs rippled through the chamber. A level 3 stun pulse could incapacitate a Jovian thunder beast. We escalated to level 5, then deployed gravitational containment. The human experienced minimal discomfort, and continued to advance toward our personnel. Impossible, declared Counselor Vlex, the gelatinous representative of the Morphon Collective. No carbon-based lifeform could withstand such measures. The evidence is irrefutable, I replied, activating the holographic display to show footage from our security feeds. The human not only withstood our defensive measures, but appeared amused by them. The council watched in stunned silence, as the recording displayed Captain Doug Jackson laughing off a direct hit that should have rendered him unconscious, then casually attempting to continue his snack offering. By the 7 moons, whispered someone from the back of the chamber. Chancellor Zorn's crystalline structure vibrated with concern. And you're certain the subject wasn't mechanized, not an artificial construct? Our scanners detected organic material, I confirmed. Though clearly unlike any organic material we've previously encountered. And after the attack, the human began consuming these. I displayed an image of the triangular orange objects. Some kind of combat ration, suggested Counselor Throx, the reptilian representative, whose species was known for their military expertise. Unknown, but the human referred to them as Cool Ranch Doritos, and seemed emotionally attached to them. The council erupted into overlapping conversations. Chancellor Zorn had to strike her ceremonial resonance crystal 3 times to restore order. This is most disturbing, she declared. If humans can withstand our standard defensive measures, they pose a significant threat to Confederation security. Commander Vrix, what is your assessment of their intentions? I hesitated. The human claimed to come in peace, but this could be deception. Their resilience suggests a species evolved for combat. Most concerning was their reaction to our defensive measures, not fear or anger, but amusement, as if our most powerful weapons were insignificant. We must take immediate action, declared Counselor Throx, rising to his considerable height. I propose we dispatch the 7th Battle Fleet to establish a quarantine perimeter around the Sol system. An overreaction, countered Counselor Grek in her melodious gas speech. One resistant individual doesn't justify military intervention. But what if they're all like this? Asked Vlex, his gelatinous form quivering. What if Earth is populated by billions of near-invulnerable beings who find our weapons amusing? The chamber fell silent as this horrifying possibility sank in. It was Junior Counselor Pip who broke the silence, the youngest member of the council and representative of the Mercurial Mines, a species of hyper-intelligent beings who existed primarily as patterns of electrical energy. Pip rarely spoke at official gatherings. Perhaps, Pip suggested, their voice manifesting as synchronized light pulses, we're approaching this situation incorrectly. Before we commit to military action, we should gather more information, study this human, learn its weaknesses. Are you volunteering for this suicidal mission? Throx asked sarcastically. Not personally, Pip replied, unperturbed. But we should assemble a specialized team, scientists, not soldiers. We need to understand what we're dealing with. Chancellor Zorn's crystalline structure chimed thoughtfully. Counselor Pip's suggestion has merit. Commander Vrex, given your first-hand experience with the human, would you be willing to lead such a team? All 17 sets of sensory organs turned to me again. I felt my scales involuntarily shift to the pale yellow of extreme reluctance. With all due respect, Chancellor, I began, searching for a diplomatic way to refuse. Excellent, Zorn continued before I could finish. You will select a team of our finest xenobiologists, defensive specialists, and cultural analysts. Your mission is to re-establish contact with this Captain Doug Jackson, assess the actual threat posed by humans, and determine appropriate Confederation policy. But Chancellor, I attempted to interject. The alternative, Zorn added pointedly, is to explain to the Confederation Assembly why you abandoned a multi-billion-unit research facility because of a single biped with triangular food. My scales shifted to resigned gray. I accept the mission, Chancellor. Wonderful, exclaimed Counselor Pip, their light pulses brightening with enthusiasm. This is a historic opportunity, the first dedicated study of human physiology and behavior. I envy your team, Commander. There's one more thing, I added reluctantly. After our strategic withdrawal, the human transmitted a message to all Confederation frequencies. What did it say? Asked Chancellor Zorn, her crystal structure tensing. I activated the final recording. Captain Doug Jackson's voice filled the chamber. Hello, alien buddies? Your station's environmental systems are making some weird noises. Also, I think I accidentally pressed something that made all your research samples start growing really fast. Sorry about that. If you could call me back with some instructions, that would be great. Oh, and I found your cafeteria. These purple cube things are delicious. The council stared in horror at the recording. He's eating the emergency nutrition blocks, whispered Counselor Vlex. Those are rated to sustain life for a standard year in one serving. And he called them delicious, added Counselor Grek. Chancellor Zorn's voice cut through the stunned silence. Commander Vrex, your mission is now upgraded to Priority Alpha. Assemble your team immediately. The human must be contained before it causes further damage, or worse, attracts more of its kind. As the council session dissolved into panicked discussions about defensive measures and evacuation protocols, I stood on the platform contemplating my spectacular career implosion. In less than 50 cycles, I had gone from respected fleet commander to the galaxy's designated human handler. And somewhere in our abandoned research station, Captain Doug Jackson was still laughing, still eating, and still completely unaware that he had just become the most feared entity in the Orion Arm. Status report, I commanded, trying to sound authoritative, despite the fact that our pursuit vessel was currently hiding behind a small moon. The human ship left the research station approximately 6 hours ago, reported Dr. Meep, our chief xenobiologist. Unlike me, she had actually volunteered for this mission, her scientific curiosity apparently overriding her survival instinct. Trajectory suggests he's heading toward the uninhabited system GX-435. What could possibly interest him there? Wondered Technician Glorb, our defensive systems specialist, who hadn't stopped trembling since watching the security footage from my first encounter with the human. Unknown, replied Lieutenant Krill, our pilot and the only member of the original research station crew I'd managed to convince to join this suicide mission. But the good news is his ship's propulsion system is primitive enough that we can maintain pursuit without being detected. That's assuming he can't detect us, muttered Security Officer Drent, a hulking Vargonian whose silicon-based physiology made him the closest thing to durable in our hastily assembled team. We still don't know the extent of human sensory capabilities. I surveyed my team, 5 of the Confederation's supposedly finest specialists, all crammed into a stealth observation vessel designed for monitoring pre-spaceflight civilizations. The irony that we were using it to track a single human wasn't lost on me. Dr. Meep, what have you learned from analyzing the station's logs? I asked. Meep's eye stalks quivered with excitement, the universal sign of a scientist with disturbing news to share. It's fascinating, Commander. The human consumed approximately 64 emergency nutrition blocks during his 3-day stay. 64? I gasped. That's enough caloric intake to sustain a Zelturian for 2 years. Precisely. Meep wiggled all her appendages in scientific delight. And that's not all. He used the station's communication array to transmit what appears to be musics into deep space for 12 consecutive hours. A distress signal? Asked Drent, his crystalline fingers tightening around his useless weapon. I don't believe so, Meep replied. Based on the patterns and repeated phrases like highway to danger areas, and shaking all evening long, I hypothesize it was for entertainment purposes. The human was entertaining itself with noise pollution. Lieutenant Krill seemed horrified. While consuming enough nutrition to feed a small colony. And that's not even the most concerning part, continued Meep. The environmental logs show he adjusted the station temperature to 22 degrees Celsius, but that's barely above freezing, exclaimed Technician Glorb. For us, yes, said Meep. For the human, it appears to be comfortable. And he maintained normal activity patterns in an oxygen-nitrogen atmosphere that would be considered toxic by 6 of the Confederation's founding species. I felt my scales shifting to the deep blue of existential dread. So we're tracking a being that can withstand our weapons, consumes enormous quantities of nutrition, breathes poison, and operates at temperatures that would freeze most sentient protoplasm. Don't forget about the waste elimination, added Meep cheerfully. The human's biological processes produced solid and liquid waste that would be classified as hazardous material on most Confederation worlds. Thank you, Doctor. I interrupted before she could elaborate further. Lieutenant Krill, take us out from behind this moon. Let's continue pursuit at a safe distance. Define safe distance when dealing with an unkillable toxic waste factory, muttered Drent. Our ship emerged from behind the moon, just in time to see the human's vessel accelerate suddenly toward the 4th planet in the GX-435 system, a barren rock with a thin methane atmosphere. He's landing, announced Krill. Should we follow? Negative, I replied. Maintain orbit and prepare the observation drones. I want visual confirmation of the human's activities without risking direct contact. Within minutes, our surveillance drones were deployed, transmitting images of Captain Doug Jackson emerging from his ship onto the planet's surface. He wore what appeared to be a protective suit with a transparent helmet, a small concession to the hostile environment that gave me a momentary sense of relief. Perhaps humans weren't completely invulnerable after all. "What is he doing?" asked Glorb, as we watched the human begin setting up equipment near his landing site. "It appears to be." Dr. Meep studied the images, her scientific detachment momentarily faltering. "Is that a folding chair? And some kind of thermal container?" Indeed, Captain Jackson had set up what looked suspiciously like a recreational campsite. He sat in his folding chair, opened his thermal container, and removed what appeared to be a cylindrical object which he then applied to his mouth after removing his helmet. "He's exposing himself to the atmosphere," gasped Krill, "and consuming something simultaneously," added Meep. "Fascinating." "Commander," interrupted our communications specialist, Technician Ziv, who had been monitoring all frequencies. "The human is transmitting again." "Put it through," I ordered, bracing myself for whatever incomprehensible message might follow. Captain Doug Jackson's voice filled our command deck. Day 24 of Earth's first deep space expedition, personal log. Found a nice spot on this methane planet for a little R&R, setting up camp for the night. Having a beer, and enjoying the view. Locals seem shy. Spotted what might be a drone, but it's keeping its distance. Visibility's good enough to see what looks like a ship hiding in orbit. If they wanted to say hi, they could just come down. Oh well, their loss. This planet has the most amazing purple sunset I've ever seen. Stunned silence filled our command deck. "He knows we're here," whispered Drent, "and he's drinking something while exposed to methane," added Meep. "Without apparent ill effects." "Purple sunset?" questioned Krill. "The star is a standard G-type yellow dwarf. The human's visual perception must differ from ours," suggested Meep. "Another physiological anomaly to add to the growing list." I stared at the image of Captain Jackson casually sipping his beer, while surrounded by an atmosphere that should have been instantly fatal. "We need to accelerate our research. Ziv, prepare a detailed analysis of all the human's communications. Meep, continue monitoring his biological functions. Glorb, I want options for containment that don't involve our standard weapons." "What about communication?" suggested Ziv. "If the human knows we're here, perhaps direct interaction would yield better results than observation." I recalled the chaos of our first meeting, and suppressed a shudder. "Negative. We maintain distance until we understand more about human capabilities and intentions." Over the next 14 days, we followed Captain Jackson through 3 more star systems. We watched in mounting horror, as he went swimming in a lake of liquid ammonia, calling it refreshingly brisk. Collected samples of crystalline formations that our sensors identified as highly radioactive, consumed food rations at a rate that would sustain a Confederation citizen for half a lifetime, repaired his ship's thruster using what appeared to be adhesive tape and creative profanity, transmitted music into space with lyrics about rocking, rolling, and something called Paradise City. Each observation added to our growing dossier on human resilience and frankly baffling behavior. The Confederation Council received our daily reports with increasing alarm, and twice I had to talk them out of deploying the battle fleet. But perhaps most disturbing was Captain Jackson's apparent awareness of our surveillance. He began waving at our drones, then leaving what he called snacks for them. Finally, on day 15 of our pursuit, he stood directly before a drone and spoke to it. "Hey there, little spybot. Look, I know your friends are up there watching me. I'm not upset about the whole shooting incident. Cultural misunderstandings happen, but this game of interstellar hide-and-seek is getting old. So here's the deal, I'm heading to the asteroid belt in the next system. If you guys want to talk, I'll be there. If not, that's cool too. I'll leave you some Twinkies either way. They've got a shelf life of like forever, so they're perfect space food." "He's inviting us to a meeting," said Ziv. "It's obviously a trap," growled Drent. "But what kind of trap could he possibly need?" countered Meep. "He's demonstrated resistance to our weapons, tolerance for environments we find lethal, and awareness of our surveillance. If he wanted to harm us, he's had ample opportunity." I considered our options, my scales shifting through a range of colors that reflected my internal conflict. The Council wanted information, direct communication would certainly provide that. But my first encounter with humanity still haunted my dreams. "We accept his invitation," I finally decided. "But we take precautions, full protective gear, emergency translocation beacons, and Drent, bring the experimental phase disruptor, the one designed to temporarily destabilize the molecular cohesion of planet-sized threats." Drent sounded hopeful for the first time in weeks. "Yes," I confirmed. "Though based on our observations so far, I'm not optimistic about its effectiveness." As we prepared for our second encounter with Captain Doug Jackson, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were missing something obvious about humans, something that might explain their inexplicable resilience and casual disregard for environmental hazards that would annihilate most sentient species. Whatever the explanation, I was determined to get answers. The Confederation's future security might depend on it. And personally, I needed to understand how a being could get shot with a stun pulse powerful enough to incapacitate a Jovian thunderbeast and respond with laughter. What was humanity's secret? And more importantly, how many more Captain Jacksons were waiting back on Earth? The asteroid belt of System GX-438 was a navigational nightmare, a chaotic whirl of rock and ice fragments ranging from microscopic dust to city-sized boulders. It was exactly the sort of place that any sensible spacefaring species would avoid, which is why naturally, Captain Doug Jackson had chosen it as our meeting point. Sensors detect the human's vessel docked with a large asteroid approximately 700,000 kilometers ahead, reported Lieutenant Krill, her tentacles working frantically across the navigation console. Any signs of weaponry or defensive systems? Asked Drent, who was struggling to adjust the experimental phase disruptor to his silicon-based appendages. Negative, replied Ziv, from the communication station, just the standard configuration we've been tracking. Although, she paused, her sensory frills extending with concern, I am detecting unusual thermal readings from the asteroid itself. Elaborate, I commanded, feeling my scales shift to the purple-green pattern that signified nervous anticipation. The asteroid appears to have been hollowed out, Ziv explained. And there's an artificial atmosphere being maintained inside. Composition is primarily nitrogen-oxygen. He's terraformed an asteroid, gasped Meep, her scientific excitement overwhelming her survival instinct once again. In less than a standard cycle, that's technologically impossible. Apparently not for humans, I muttered, adjusting my protective environmental suit. Maintain alert status and prepare the shuttle. We meet the human as planned, but everyone stays in full protective gear. 20 minutes later, our shuttle docked with the asteroid alongside Captain Jackson's vessel, the docking mechanism connected with a concerning series of clanks and hisses that did nothing to calm my apprehension. Atmosphere in the connecting passage is breathable, announced Glorb, consulting his wrist-mounted scanner. For the human, that is. Maintain suit integrity. Weapons ready, I asked Drent. The security officer patted the bulky phase disruptor. As ready as possible. Though based on our observations, I'm not sure if ready has any meaning when it comes to humans. Stay alert, I instructed as the airlock cycled open. Remember your training and welcome to Casa de Jackson, boomed a familiar voice, as the inner door slid aside. Come on in. Watch your step, artificial gravity's a bit spotty in patches. Captain Doug Jackson stood before us, not in an environmental suit or protective gear, but in what appeared to be casual attire, a colorful shirt featuring palm trees, loose blue leg coverings, and some kind of primitive foot protection he would later identify as flip-flops. He was holding another cylindrical container, similar to the one we'd observed him consuming on the methane planet. You guys finally decided to stop with the spy drone routine, huh? Great. I was getting tired of monologuing to cameras. Come on, the living room's this way. We followed cautiously, our team maintaining defensive formation, as we entered what appeared to be an excavated chamber within the asteroid. What I saw inside defied all logical explanation. The chamber had been transformed into something resembling a habitat, but not a scientific outpost or military base as one might expect. Instead, it looked like a recreational dwelling. Furniture made from reconfigured spacecraft components sat atop a covering that Captain Jackson would later call a throw rug. Light was provided by floating illumination orbs that appeared to be modified emergency beacons, and in one corner stood some kind of primitive food preparation area, with several containers emitting peculiar aromas. Make yourselves comfortable, Doug gestured toward the furniture. Beer in the cooler. I've also got some snacks laid out. Wasn't sure what you folks eat, so I brought variety. None of us moved. I noticed Drent's silicon fingers tightening around his weapon. Or we can stand. Standing's cool too, Doug continued, apparently undeterred by our rigid postures. So I'm guessing you have questions. Like why I didn't die when you shot me. Totally fair. You are aware of our surveillance, I stated, trying to maintain command presence despite my astonishment at our surroundings. Hard to miss. You guys aren't exactly subtle. The ship that's been following me makes this weird humming noise in the upper frequency range.
Plus your drones have property of galactic confederations written on them in like 6 different languages. Ziv made a small sound of embarrassment behind me. Security protocols would need to be updated. What is your purpose in Confederation space? I demanded, deciding direct questioning was our best approach. Doug took a casual sip from his container. Exploration, cultural exchange, the usual first contact stuff. Earth finally got its act together enough for deep space missions, and I volunteered. Seemed like fun.
And the research station? I pressed. Was consuming our emergency rations part of this cultural exchange? Oh, those purple cube things. Sorry about that. I didn't realize they were emergency supplies. They tasted like grape bubblegum, so I figured they were snacks. He shrugged apologetically. I left some Twinkies as replacement. Fair trade, I thought. Dr. Meep stepped forward, her scientific curiosity apparently overwhelming her caution. Human Jackson, your physiological resilience is unprecedented in our records. You withstood weapons designed to incapacitate beings 3 times your mass. You breathed methane without apparent ill effects. Wait, what? Doug interrupted, looking genuinely confused. Methane? When did I breathe methane? On the 4th planet of System GX-435, Meep replied. Our drones recorded you removing your helmet and consuming a beverage. Doug stared at her for a moment, then burst into laughter, that same disturbing sound that had haunted my nightmares since our first encounter. Oh man, that's hilarious. I didn't breathe methane. My ship has this portable atmosphere bubble generator, creates a 5-meter radius of Earth normal conditions, comes standard on all our exploration vessels since the Europa incident. I thought you guys would have picked that up on your sensors. A stunned silence fell over our team. As for getting shot, Doug continued, still chuckling, did you think I was immune or something? That blast hurt like hell, but my exploration suit has integrated impact absorption technology. Standard issue after we discovered just how trigger-happy some species can be during first contact. He pulled aside his colorful shirt to reveal a faint scar on his chest. Still left a mark though, but the nutrition blocks, stammered Meep. Yeah, sorry again about those. Human metabolism is pretty calorie-intensive, especially in space. We burn through food quickly. Evolution on a high-gravity world with predators will do that to a species. He shrugged. But hey, that's why I brought snacks to share. Cultural exchange, remember? I felt my scales shifting rapidly through colors of confusion, relief and embarrassment. You're saying you're not invulnerable? Invulnerable? Doug laughed again. Hell no. I'm as squishy as they come, just well-equipped and stubborn. Earth's exploration protocol is basically prepare for everything and refuse to die until the mission's complete. But the asteroid, I gestured around us. You've transformed it in days. Oh this? Doug glanced around proudly. Portable habitat kit, nanobots do most of the work. Excavate, reinforce, set up life support. Takes about 12 hours. Not exactly comfortable, but better than sleeping in the ship. For the first time in weeks, I felt my scales settle into their natural diplomatic beige. The human wasn't an invincible threat, just a well-prepared explorer with technology slightly more advanced than we'd given Earth credit for. There appears to have been a significant misunderstanding, I admitted, finally relaxing my posture. The Confederation believed humans to be some form of super beings based on our observations. Super beings. Doug raised an eyebrow. That's flattering, but no, we're just adaptable. Earth throws a lot of challenges at you, multiple biomes, climate shifts, natural disasters. You either learn to roll with it, or you don't make it. Drent finally lowered his weapon. Then you pose no threat to the Confederation, unless you consider cultural contamination through snack foods a threat. No. Doug gestured toward a container filled with colorful packages. Speaking of which, anyone want to try a Twinkie? They're technically cake, but with a cream filling that defies both physics and nutritional science. Slowly, hesitantly, my team began to relax. Dr. Meep was the first to approach the offered snacks, her scientific curiosity once again overriding caution. She extended an appendage toward the yellow oblong object Bill held. Just a warning, he added with a grin. Once you start with Earth snacks, it's hard to stop. They're engineered to be addictive. More human weapons? Asked Drent suspiciously. Of a sort, Doug laughed. But the only thing they'll destroy is your diet plan. As my team cautiously interacted with the human and his offerings, I reviewed the situation. The Confederation had mobilized emergency protocols, abandoned a research station, and nearly deployed a battle fleet,
all because we'd misinterpreted normal human adaptability and preparation as supernatural resilience. And it had all started because Captain Doug Jackson had laughed when we shot him. I believe, I said, finally, removing my helmet in a gesture of trust, that the Confederation and Earth have much to learn from each other. Perhaps we should start over without shooting you this time. Doug's face formed what I now recognized as a genuine smile, not a threat display. I'd like that, Commander. And hey, for what it's worth, your weapons did hurt. I just figured laughing it off was better diplomacy than screaming in pain. A wise approach, I conceded, extending my primary appendage in a gesture I'd observed him use previously. As Doug's 5-fingered hand clasped mine, I couldn't help but wonder how many other misunderstandings awaited us in this new relationship between our civilizations. But at least we'd cleared up the most immediate one. Humans weren't invulnerable super beings. They were just incredibly stubborn, well-prepared, and had a disturbing tendency to laugh at things that should incapacitate them. In retrospect, I'm not sure which is more terrifying. The Confederation Council chamber was silent as I concluded my report. 17 representatives of the most advanced civilizations in the Orion Arm stared at me with expressions ranging from disbelief to embarrassment, at least among those species whose anatomy permitted facial expressions. Let me summarize, said Chancellor Zorn, her crystalline structure vibrating with what I recognized as barely contained frustration. We nearly initiated an interstellar incident because Captain Jackson was wearing what amounts to a glorified chest protector, and had a portable atmosphere generator, I added helpfully. Don't forget the nanobots that transform asteroids into habitable spaces in 12 hours. Yes, quite, Zorn responded dryly. The technology implications are concerning, if I may, Chancellor, interjected Dr. Meep, who had insisted on accompanying me to this session. I believe we're missing the more significant revelation here. More significant than discovering humans aren't invulnerable super beings, asked Counselor Vlex, his gelatinous form still quivering from the relief of this news. Yes, Meep's eye stalks quivered with excitement. Consider what we've learned about human psychology and adaptability. Captain Jackson was shot by unknown aliens, yet his response was to laugh it off and continue attempting friendly contact. When we fled in panic, he occupied himself by exploring our station and transmitting music into space. When followed by our surveillance drones, he left snacks for them. Your point, Doctor? Prompted Chancellor Zorn. My point is that humans are psychologically resilient in ways that may be more significant than any physical vulnerability. They appear to possess an almost pathological optimism and adaptability that our species lack. Counselor Throx, the reptilian military expert, leaned forward. You're suggesting this is a species-wide trait, based on our analysis of Earth's historical and cultural data? Yes, continued Meep. Humans have survived ice ages, plagues, world wars, climate disasters, and their own technological missteps. They've colonized nearly every environment on their planet, from Arctic tundra to scorching deserts, and now they're venturing into space with the same adaptability. This presents both opportunity and risk, I added. Humans aren't invulnerable, but they are remarkably persistent. Chancellor Zorn's crystalline structure chimed thoughtfully. What is your recommendation, Commander Vrex?
I had spent the journey back to Confederation space contemplating this very question. I believe we should establish formal diplomatic relations with Earth. Their technology is more advanced than we estimated, but still complementary rather than threatening to our own. And their psychological resilience could be valuable to the Confederation. Not to mention, added Meep, that Captain Jackson has already transmitted our coordinates to Earth's space program. He was quite apologetic about it but explained it was standard protocol. A ripple of alarm passed through the council. He did what? Gasped Counselor Grech. Apparently, Earth has a policy of sharing all significant discoveries with their entire species, I explained. Something about knowledge belonging to all of humanity. The concept seemed deeply important to him. So more humans could arrive at any moment, asked Vlex, beginning to quiver again. It's possible, I admitted, though Captain Jackson assured me they would follow proper diplomatic protocols. He's been sharing our cultural information with his superiors, and they're quite eager for peaceful contact. Chancellor Zorn struck her resonance crystal, bringing the murmuring council to order. The council will need time to consider this development. Commander Vrex, you and your team are to be commended for resolving this situation without further incident. Until formal diplomatic procedures are established, you will serve as our liaison with any humans we encounter. I felt my scales shift involuntarily to the pale yellow of resignation. Of course I would be made the official human handler. The universe has a perverse sense of humor that way. 3 cycles later, I found myself aboard the Confederation diplomatic vessel Harmonious Exchange, approaching Earth's orbital space station. Captain Jackson had returned home ahead of us, apparently eager to share tales of his adventures with his fellow humans. Incoming transmission from the Earth station announced Ziv, who had volunteered to join this mission despite her better judgment. On screen, I commanded. Straightening my ceremonial diplomatic sash, the view screen activated to show not Captain Jackson but a different human, this one female, with darker skin and coverings that appeared more formal. "Greetings, Confederation representatives," she said, her face displaying what I now recognized as a diplomatic smile. "I'm Director Elena Reyes of the Earth Unity Space Program. On behalf of humanity, welcome to our solar system. We're thrilled to establish formal contact with the Galactic Confederation." "Greetings, Director Reyes," I responded, using the formal diplomatic phrasing I'd rehearsed extensively. "The Galactic Confederation extends peaceful greetings to Earth and its people. We look forward to cultural and scientific exchange between our civilizations." "As do we," she replied. "Captain Jackson has shared fascinating information about your species and technology. We have prepared appropriate environmental accommodations for your delegation based on his reports." "That is most considerate," I acknowledged. "We have brought gifts and cultural artifacts to share with humanity." Director Reyes' smile widened. "Wonderful. We've prepared some things for you as well. Captain Jackson mentioned you particularly enjoyed something called Twinkies." Behind me, I heard Dr. Meep make a small sound of anticipation. The yellow oblong sweetness had become something of an obsession for our xenobiologist. "We have developed a certain appreciation for your distinctive cultural artifacts," I admitted diplomatically. "Excellent. We'll have a variety of Earth foods available. The diplomatic reception will include representatives from all Earth's major regions. Everyone is eager to meet you. Captain Jackson's stories have created quite a buzz." I suppressed a shudder, imagining dozens of Captain Jacksons, all laughing off stun blasts and consuming alarming quantities of nutrition blocks. "Before we proceed with docking," Director Reyes continued, her expression becoming more serious, "I want to formally apologize for the misunderstanding during first contact. Captain Jackson can be enthusiastic. We've updated our protocols to prevent similar incidents in the future. The Confederation equally regrets the hasty response of our research station personnel," I replied, diplomatic training kicking in. "We look forward to a more measured relationship moving forward." As the transmission ended and our ship began its final approach to the Earth station, I turned to my team. "Remember your training. No sudden movements, no deploying weapons, and under no circumstances are you to comment on their bizarre respiratory processes or their alarming tendency to consume solid food in public." "Commander," Ziv asked hesitantly, "do you think they're all like Captain Jackson?" I considered the question carefully. Based on their planetary history and Captain Jackson's explanations, I believe humans share certain core traits: adaptability, persistence, and a concerning level of optimism in the face of adversity. But I hope that Captain Jackson represents an extreme example of his species. As we docked with the Earth station and prepared to disembark, I couldn't help but reflect on how thoroughly one human had upended Confederation protocols and perceptions. We had shot him, and he had laughed and kept coming, not because he was invulnerable, but because stopping simply wasn't in his nature. If that was truly representative of humanity as a whole, the galaxy was about to become a much more interesting place. "Airlock secure, Commander," reported Ziv. "Earth delegation awaiting our arrival." I adjusted my ceremonial sash one final time and gave the order to open the door, prepared to lead the Confederation into a new era of interspecies relations. "Oh, and Commander," added Ziv with what I recognized as poorly concealed amusement, "Director Reyes mentioned that Captain Jackson will be serving as their chief diplomatic liaison to the Confederation. He specifically requested to work with you." My scales shifted rapidly through every color in the Zelturian emotional spectrum before settling on a resignation gray so deep it was nearly black. Of course he did. The universe, it seems, has a sense of humor remarkably similar to that of humans. And as the airlock doors opened to reveal a delegation of smiling humans, Captain Doug Jackson front and center, wearing his ridiculous palm tree shirt and holding a container of Twinkies, I accepted that my life would never be the same. We had shot a human, and he had laughed and kept coming. Now the rest of humanity was following right behind him. "May the 7 moons have mercy on us all,"